Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Village of Gurnee Planning and Zoning Board for this Wednesday, April 6, 2022. Can we have roll call, please?
Here.
Present. We do have a quorum. If everyone would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to flip an item on the agenda here. The update from Attorney Brian Winter, we're going to move to after the public hearing matters. We're pulling the approval of the March 2nd minutes because there were some technical glitches with it, and they'll be resubmitted to us at a later time. So moving on to the public hearing, a variance for the property located at 1280 Blackburn. Dave?
Okay. Morgante Wilson Architects LTD is, on behalf of Lake County Residential Development Corporation, is seeking a variance to allow an increase in the number of units from 9 to 13 for an existing apartment structure. The subject property is zoned R6 multifamily and is located at 1280 Blackburn Street. The bulk standards for the R6 zoning district require a minimum of 3,200 square feet per dwelling unit, resulting in a maximum of 9 units for this 0.69 acre or 30,000 square foot lot. The Planning and Zoning Board will conduct the public hearing and provide a recommendation to the Village Board on this request. The Village Board has the final authority on this request.
Thank you, Dave. As this item is a public hearing, I would request anybody from the petitioner or members of the general public that intend to give testimony or ask questions to please stand and be sworn in.
Yes, if you could stand, raise your right hand. And again, if anybody else might have some contributions to this, or if there's any people that, any persons that might want to give any testimony, this is a good time to stand up and I'll swear you in. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay, at this time, I'll turn the floor over to the petitioner. If you could please use the microphone. Oh, great, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rob Anthony. I'm the president of Community Partners for Affordable Housing. In January of 2019, the three largest nonprofit affordable housing organizations in Lake County merged into a single organization. So those three entities were Lake County Residential Development Corporation, the Affordable Housing Corporation of Lake County, and Community Partners for Affordable Housing. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to present tonight. I'm joined by our architects, Fred Wilson and John Leonard, who will provide a little more detail on the request tonight. Who I'll add is also providing these architecture services to us pro bono, so they're very generous. And then Mike Mader is here as well. He's the president of the Affordable Housing Corporation, which serves as our nonprofit construction arm. So Community Partners for Affordable Housing is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. Our mission is to develop affordable housing and to provide services that empower individuals and families to secure and retain quality housing. So we have a very broad range of affordable housing services. We're a HUD-certified housing counseling agency, so we prepare people for successful, responsible homeownership. We provide down payment assistance. People can get up to 5% of the purchase price to apply towards down payment and closing costs to purchase their first homes. We have affordable homes that we develop for sale, affordable rental units that we develop. We provide rental assistance. We have a series of home repair and accessibility programs where people can get up to $40,000 to make critical life safety and health improvements on their homes, as well as accessibility improvements. The accessibility program in particular is designed to prevent premature or unnecessary institutionalization so that people can remain in the community. We also offer foreclosure prevention services, community land trust programming, inclusionary housing administration, and really a wide range of other services. So just to give you a little bit of history of this particular building, Lake County Residential Development Corporation purchased this building in 1999, I believe, and it was originally used as a transitional housing program for single women with children. There were 9 units in this building. The top floor was used as office space for Catholic Charities, who provided some on-site services, and for Lake County Residential Development Corporation. The building eventually transitioned into a permanent affordable housing as opposed to a transitional housing building. So at that time, Catholic Charities no longer needed the office space on the top floor. Lake County Residential Development Corporation continued to use that as their main office. In January 2019, when the 3 organizations merged, Lake County Residential Development Corporation came into our main larger office in Libertyville. So that space has sat vacant. The whole top floor has been vacant since January of 2019, and really providing no public benefit to the community. So all along, our intent was to convert that space into additional affordable housing units, but between the merger and COVID, that just took us longer to get to than we originally intended. The village has always been very supportive of affordable housing and trying to create more workforce housing in the village. And this is really a great opportunity that we can relatively quickly and relatively inexpensively add 4 more units in the community that will remain affordable in perpetuity. So we think it's a great use of this space. It's a public benefit as opposed to just having vacant space there now. So we're requesting a positive recommendation to add those 4 units. The other variance is just a minor parking variance. If we add those 4 units, technically we would be required to have 25 spaces, I believe, and we have 24 spaces right now, so we would be short 1 space. But in the 20-plus years that we've owned this building, we've never had more than 1 car per unit. So we've had 9 spots of the 24 used at any given time. So we really have ample parking there. We do have additional space that we could make into another parking spot if absolutely necessary, but we really would like to avoid that and like to avoid giving up that green space to provide another spot that would likely never be used, but we could do that at some point in the future. So that's our request and a little bit about SEPA and who we are. And I'll turn it over to Fred to provide a little more detail.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Fred Wilson. I'm a partner at Morganti Wilson Architects, and I'm also on the board of SEPA and have been for a number of years, so I'm obviously very supportive of what they're about. So as mentioned earlier, we are an R6 district. It's multifamily residential. The lot is 30,060 square feet, which divided by 3,200 gives you the 9.3 units. So when you take it divided by the 13 units that we're going to be asking for, it comes down to 2,312 square feet per unit, just for the math. And as Rob mentioned about the parking. The other couple hardships I just want to touch on. If we don't get this, will result in an undue hardship unless the specific relief requested is granted. We would like to add the 4 more units, which we think is consistent with the rest of the building. The hardship would be the loss of these additional affordable units to the rental units to the community of Gurnee. The alleged hardship of the owner is due to unique circumstances inherent to the subject property. The prior nonprofit used it as an office space, as Rob mentioned. If we don't get the approval tonight, it'll prohibit the use of this vacant space. We will not alter the essential character of the locality. We are building all of this within the existing structure, except for some changes to some exterior window openings which are on the rear of the building. The essential character of the building will be unaltered, and it will be consistent with the underlying zoning and not detrimental to the public welfare of the locality. And if the strict letter of regulations were to be carried out, the 3rd floor would remain vacant and not be able to benefit the local community and its current need for affordable residential housing. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Members of the board? Dave, would you like to start?
I'm in favor of allowing them to go from 9 to 13 units. Since this top floor, right now with the current code of 9 units, they couldn't use this floor for any more units other than office space, and I don't see office space being any more beneficial to community than affordable housing. And being this is a nonprofit, they're not in it just for the money, for the additional rent, so I'm in favor of it. As far as the parking spaces, I think they have plenty of space at this point, but could we add, since they offered that up, the land banking of the one space?
I think so. I think by definition,
They've already,
it is being land banked
Okay.
based on their presentation.
okay.
Dave?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I know that they acquired this property with that office already existing, so, you know, and I don't think that it's an appropriate continued use. The building was obviously intended and designed and zoned for residential use. So now they have a piece of property that they can't fully utilize for really what is, I believe, its intended use was for. And when you take a look at the character of the neighborhood, there's going to be no architectural changes. I think the request is reasonable, and they're really, I mean, the alternative, if you're looking just to say, well, how can we generate revenue? Can we rent this as, continued office space? I mean, I just don't think that that's practical, and I just don't think that that's really, if we're going to use the variation process to kind of right a wrong or correct a situation, well, I don't think we'd be correcting it by saying, okay, well, you have to leave it as office. Okay, so therefore, I'm in favor of it.
Todd?
I'm in favor. Just drove by there earlier this evening, and it's all residential. Affordable housing is much needed, and so I'm totally in favor of it. As for the parking, there's other two buildings that have a lot of parking also.
I'm generally in favor of the request as well. I worked with Dave to do a little more research in terms of like density, just to maybe get some discussion on the record relative to density. And I tend to think more in terms of units per acre. And the request is asking for just under 19 units per acre, which is about 50% more than the underlying zoning that would be normally permitted. However, there are other aspects of our overall zoning ordinance that do give recognition to special situations, specifically affordable housing. And it's my understanding that under the existing underlying ordinances, if this was proposed as age-restricted affordable housing, they could have as many as nearly 40 units per acre. And they're asking for 19 round numbers in this particular situation. And for perspective, the Hawthorne, how do I see this writing here? Heritage Woods development at the corner of Grand and Waveland, that's coming in just under 28 units per acre. So I think we're in a good sweet spot here overall from my perspective. But I think it's important to get that discussion of density so that we're dealing with some facts and figures as opposed to just, gut feel type stuff. So,
Thank you.
okay, I'm going to go through the formality of opening the floor to the public. Is there anybody from the public that would care to ask anything? All right, close the floor to the public. Any other discussion by members of the Planning and Zoning Board? If not, a motion in the favor of a recommendation would be in order specifically as it relates to the density variance. Okay, Todd?
Motion to forward a favorable recommendation on the petition of Gurnee, Wilson,
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Papp. Any discussion? Joanne, can we have roll call, please?
Bow. Campbell. Norntop.
Aye.
Papp.
Aye.
And Sula.
Aye, motion carries. As you know, we are recommending body to the village board, and staff will let you know when the village board will make their final decision. Now, on the parking modification, it's my understanding that the planning and zoning board has decision-making capability on this particular item. So a motion in the form of an approval would be in order. Sure, go ahead, Dave.
I move that we approve the parking modification request by Morganti Wilson Architects on behalf of LCR DC-MPP LCC as proposed this evening.
We have a motion, a second by Todd. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Bow. Campbell. Norntop. Papp.
Aye.
And Sula.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'll turn the floor over to Brian to give the update that he requested. Oh, okay. Thank you. Brian, you want this, or are you going to sit someplace else?
I'll just sit there.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Sula. Periodically, I do like to update the commissioners concerning legal matters, and so tonight I'd like to review a number of things, including a new disclosure of economic interest statement form. And so, David, if you can go to the next slide. So basically, 4 quick topics this evening. I'd like to first discuss the disclosure of the economic interest statement that you've all received via email. And you may have received a notice Monday, Monday, or at least I received it, reminding me that this has to be filed by the end of this month, otherwise monetary penalties are imposed. We're also going to talk about conflicts of interest, because that's really one of the reasons for the disclosure of the economic interest statement. Then, because we've had some new members, and I haven't presented for some time on public hearing procedures, I am going to give my 6 top tips of what seems to work at the public hearing for plan commissions. And then finally, I have one slide, just a reminder on the Open Meetings Act. So if we can go to the next slide, David. So this is the new form, and it is new because there's different questions on the form. And what I like to talk about are the first 2 questions, because I think everyone here will be confronted with having to provide information that they did not have to provide in the past. So if we can go to the next slide. And again, I've already mentioned this. This is a form that is required under the Illinois Governmental Ethics Act. And basically, that was enacted to reveal any potential conflicts. And certainly there's been a lot in the news about some public officials who have been indicted. And this was, some of the changes to this form were motivated perhaps by those events to provide more specific information so that the public could have greater transparency, perhaps expose situations where there was ghost payrolling or where there were business interests that may not have been apparent under the old filing. And so and then secondly, the second bullet point, again, by statute, you are required to file this. So let's go to the first question. And basically, that's rather hard to read, but I can find a copy of that and address what it says there. Basically, what you now have to do with the new form is, if you have any single asset worth more than $10,000 as of December 31st, 2021, and it's held payable to either you or you and your spouse jointly, or you and a minor child, you're now going to have to disclose that. I provided at your seat a 4-page fact sheet prepared by the Illinois Municipal League, and on this slide, I've utilized the graph or table to distinguish what are considered to be assets and what are not assets under the definition of assets under the statute. And so let's first start with the assets that do not have to be included. So what is excluded is your personal residence, vehicles, savings, checking, any retirement funds that you have, and the list is included here. There's further discussion of these definitions in that handout that I've given you. But I do want to just focus in on assets that are included now that you'll have to disclose. And basically, they're talking about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, investment real estate. So if you own real estate in your name or jointly with your spouse, you will have to list that. You do not have to give the address. You can list the city and state where it's located. Also, it talks about business and partnership interests. So if you own investment property in an LLC, you'll also have to list that. So I just want to make you aware of that. The threshold is $10,000. Again, you just have to list the identity of the asset. You don't have to list any amounts. And if you have any specific questions, I'll be available after the meeting, or you can follow up with me. I know, in particular, some questions that have come up is, essentially this is post-tax investments. And I know some of the questions that are coming in. What if I own, 30 stocks with over that as of December 31st had a value greater than 10,000? So do I have to list Tesla, Apple, and all those stocks? And the answer would be yes, if it's a manageable number. There has been some discussion that if it's in a brokerage account where it's really in street name, there might be a possibility that you could summarize it if there were a lot of stocks to say I have a brokerage account at JP Morgan that's holding 40, that has 40 separate holdings in publicly traded funds, and presumably you're listing that number because that's over $10,000. But in any event, that's a reporting requirement that you have to list. And again, I think from the state legislature's perspective, this was a way to have greater transparency, to find out whether you had any business interest in LLCs or other entities that it would not be apparent that you had an ownership interest in. If we go to the next slide, the next question talks about income. This should be a little easier to answer, I think, for most of us. But again, you now have to list, again, not any amounts, but if you do receive income greater than $7,500 for the last tax reporting year, and so shortly everybody's return will be due, that might be a good place to review what sources you have to list. So if you're employed and you made over $7,500, you would list that employer down. Again, just listing the name of the employer. If you do have an LLC or a partnership that have K-1 filings that pass through and end up on your return, again, you'd have to list that. And again, I would reference you to the handout because it also talks about capital gains over $7,500, and so there could be a number of income sources that you would have to list, and I've just summarized some of those. Again, there are exclusions, but when you get to this question, you may have to consult your tax return, quite frankly, and I'd make that recommendation just to make sure the accountant may have assisted in providing that information, and you might have to look at what's presented to determine whether that $7,500 threshold is operative. So the form otherwise, the new questions really focus on whether you're a lobbyist. I don't think anybody here qualifies as a lobbyist, but if you do, there's some discussion of that in the handout. And then also there is a question about employment and connections with public utilities. And again, if that happens to be operative for you, you'll have to look at that. If it is not operative, you do have to provide a written response to every question. So no and none may be appropriate questions somewhere along this form. So really kind of as a transitional slide, if we go to the next one, I do have this cartoon. No, it's too late for the Oversight Committee. Send it to the Hindsight Committee. Well, the reason I thought of that is, for presenting tonight, is number one, if you've already filed, you can amend your return. But I do want to explain, why is the state interested in conflicts of interest? And so let's talk a little bit about that with the next couple of slides. There are really three main state statutes that outline what public officials cannot do. And one of the major provisions in the state statutes is the Public Officer Prohibited Activities Act. And what that act says, that public officials cannot have a direct or indirect interest in any contract or work the official may be called upon to act or vote on the award of contracts. So that will not be operative for anyone here at the Planning Commission level. That would be the county board, because you're not approving contracts, but that's part of the statute, and so you should know that. Secondly, representation of parties and persons and corporations that have applications before us. So tonight, we had a public hearing where an entity was representing an applicant. Well, your company cannot represent, if you happen to own a company that would somehow represent someone making an application in front of this board, that would be prohibited. And then finally, it's very obvious, you cannot directly or indirectly take money or things of value as a gift, bribe, or a means of influencing votes or actions. So those are prohibitions. There's no way, and this requires you, if you want to do business with the village, there are some small exceptions if it's a contract less than $2,000, and there are actually a number of other exceptions. But these cannot be issues where you simply recuse yourself from. If you had a direct or indirect interest, or wanted to have a direct or indirect interest in a contract, you would have to resign. That's what the statute says. There's no way, and the thought is that even if you recuse yourself and acknowledge that you have this connection, your colleagues that you've been working on are still going to decide whether a particular contract is going to be awarded, and the state has deemed that that is not a good situation. So that's one of the statutes. If we go to the next slide, there's another one just called Conflict of Interest Statute, and it again addresses contracts, but it also talks about purchases of municipal property, which really doesn't happen too often. But again, that's another statute that public officials should just be aware of. It's a continuing theme here. And again, you cannot just recuse yourself on the vote to sell, the municipal property, which again requires generally a public hearing and public notice. The next one is the criminal code. The section number is given there. This is a little broader. It talks about public officials, they cannot knowingly commit an act forbidden by law. And some of the examples for this, you can't have municipal employees work at your house, while they're supposed to be working for the village. You can't buy a lawnmower and misappropriate funds. So it's more broader, and it has that, it talks about even the solicitation of misconduct, including soliciting campaign contributions from a person with business pending before a regulatory agency. And so again, by listing all of your connections, your financial interest, it is hoped, I think, by the state legislature that some of these conflicts can be brought to the attention, or when the elected officials fill this out, this is a good time for them to reflect on making sure that they aren't presenting any situations where there could be a potential conflict. If we go to the next slide. Finally, there's a common law conflict of interest. This isn't by state statute, but there are some opinions out there within Illinois law and some attorney general opinions that say a common law conflict can result if a personal advantage could be obtained by performing official activities while serving. And I'll give you just a hypothetical that I thought of. Let's say you're serving and your spouse has a business that sells dental equipment to dentists, and you find out that someone your spouse has worked with plans to move to our village, but they need to have rezoning of property. And you think that, hey, if they are able to rezone this property, there's a good chance my spouse could benefit, or I could benefit, because that would be an increased sale. That's very remote, and it's purely a hypothetical, but that might be an instance where you would say, that could be a common law conflict of interest. You don't have any pecuniary interest, financial interest in whether the dentist succeeds in getting the rezoning or not. But your family, an argument could be made, and the questions could be brought, wondering about whether you had made an unbiased decision. So just think about that. That's one example. In that particular instance, because it isn't prohibited by a state statute, you would be able to recuse, and it would not necessarily require you to resign. I'd also like to draw the distinction or contrast. That doesn't mean if you're at the grocery store and you see someone that you know and they say, hey, I see that there's a rezoning coming up, you should vote against that. Okay, that isn't a basis to recuse yourself, that, an acquaintance, had given you some recommendation on that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that with some of the tips shortly. But I just want to draw that distinction that these conflicts are looking at situations where someone could argue you've benefited financially because of your position. A final statute that exists, and it's not really a conflict of interest statute, but it is one that applies to everyone here, and it's called the State Officials and Employee Ethics Act. And what this says is, in the statute, there are prohibited sources identified, and essentially those are vendors that are doing work for the village. And even though you don't have a pecuniary interest in what they're doing, there is this restriction. So for instance, if a vendor that runs the golf course has an open house and you're invited to that, what should you do? Well, it turns out there's an exception for food or entertainment not exceeding $75 per day on a single day. So if you did happen to get invited to an open house or a luncheon and provided with complimentary tickets, or nobody was being charged, it was a free event, you could go to that. It just occurred to me, actually the village of Gurnee has a more restrictive condition on it. It's $50. And so the state statute's $75, but the village code is $50. But that is an exception. And the same thing for any gift or item. If it's less than $100, so if there's tickets to an event, either here or somewhere else, and a prohibited source. A prohibited source is not someone that necessarily has a zoning petition in front of you. They just happen to be doing work with the village, perhaps under a vendor contract. And again, just be mindful that there are those restrictions. So if we can go to the next section, and again, as kind of a transition here, there's good and bad with zoning, and generally one of the aspects of being a commissioner is that you want to make sure that the public and the applicants know that you're not being capricious, you're not being silly, you're not being overly restrictive like this cartoon is portraying. And so if we can go to the next slide, these are not legal requirements per se. These are just observations that I'm sure Chairman Sula and other people, Brian and Dave, and anybody that served on the Plan Commission recognize. But I do want to spend some time just talking about 6 items here. when we have public hearings, and tonight, you know, I heard different commissioners refer to both the report and a site visit, but I do strongly recommend that all plan commissioners really do read their staff reports carefully before meetings and public hearings. The one thing I like to point out is some municipalities, staff will actually make a recommendation. Gurnee does not do that. If they did make a recommendation, that's not binding on the plan commissioners, but I just want to point out, staff does not make recommendations, so generally when you're reading their report, it's not a question of you agreeing or disagreeing with the staff report, because they're trying to provide the context, the background, the historical information about the ordinances, and that's very important for the hearing process. The second item I've placed here is consider a site visit. I know someone mentioned they did a site visit before tonight's matter, and that is a good thing. I can speak from personal experience. Sometimes when you're looking at blueprints or plans, distances can be deceiving. What turns out to be 30 or 100 feet, if you go out to the site, you can discern whether that's really a meaningful distance or not. The third one is, again, this is not a legal requirement, it's just common sense. Always be courteous and impartial to each other, the public and staff. If we can go to the next one. This one, I do want to emphasize, make sure that you do not make decisions before the hearing process is completed. For instance, sometimes in the normal course of life, people may know in a smaller community that you're on the plan commission, and they may know that there's an upcoming hearing, and they may want to discuss that with you. Generally speaking, when people have comments, I think a good response always is to acknowledge, oh yes, I plan on learning about that application at the public hearing. So that you're making it clear to them that you understand it's a deliberative process. You're not making a decision before the hearing process is complete. And again, even in the questioning, sometimes there might be times where sometimes a commissioner, might want to indicate how they're leaning on a particular issue. It's generally best to wait till all the evidence is in, which is the next point. You can always ask questions. I mean, there's no problem with asking questions or stating concerns you have so that the petitioner and the public can further address what you see to be important issues that will relate to whether or not you approve or disapprove a particular application. There's no problem in that. But I can tell you that if harsh statements are made that either for or against a proposal, the public and the applicant, they begin to question, is this really an unbiased, fair decision? And a lot of times it's not intentional on the part of the plan commissioner, it's just something that you have to be aware of. The fifth item is, really just a continuation of that last item. Make decisions after the close of testimony, the public comment. Another thing is be mindful of some of the distinctions between evidence and opinions. Don't disregard opinions, but just understand there has to be a factual basis for those opinions. And then oftentimes you may want to consider, whether there is a sufficient basis to have opinions. Sometimes, everyone can have an opinion, but sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find out why that person, what information is driving that opinion. And then finally, you make your unbiased decision based on the evidence, the law, the standards of review, and considering the overall public good to the community. You're going to find out that in many of the standards of review that you have to consider, the public good to a community, all often factors in as part of those standards. So those are, again, things that all the experienced plan commissioners already know, but I thought I'd just throw that in. And again, I think that the temptation or the situations that present themselves sometimes when there is a public hearing that has a lot of public interest, Sometimes there will be petitions circulated, and those petitioners, sometimes they even want to have the plan commissioners sign that. Well, don't do that, because you have to wait till all the evidence has been considered. And again, we don't have a prohibition against ex parte communications, but we certainly discourage them. So when someone wants to talk to you about something that's going to take place in the future, you just have to politely tell them that, yes, you're on the plan commission and you're looking forward to the public hearing, looking forward to the staff report, which will be made public to everyone, and that's what you're going to utilize to make your decision. So I just have one final slide here, just talking about the Open Meetings Act. Again, this requires all meetings be open, except for some exceptions, executive sessions. I don't recall ever having an executive session for the Plan Commission. There is quite a developed list on that, but they're all very narrow. When we talk about meetings, I think it is important to reiterate that it's a gathering of a majority of the quorum, but gatherings can be done by person, by phone, electronically, by text, or by other means. And so it isn't just face-to-face. It can take on these other communications. And then finally, I just wanted to point out, for a seven-member board, such as the Plan Commission, what is the majority of a quorum? Well, we know 4 members are necessary for a quorum, and so then we can determine that 3 members would be a majority of the quorum. And so that's why we're doing this during a meeting. I could give this presentation to only 2 of you at one time, otherwise. And sometimes I have met, just when we bring in a new member, with that person individually or 2 at a time. But that's something to remember, even after tonight's meeting or before the meeting. You can have discussions. I do want to point out, if you're at let's say you're at a public event, or you're at the Genesee Theater to see to view a show there, and it turns out there are 3 members of your Plan Commission, and you say hi. There's nothing wrong with that. It's conducting of business. But again, to ensure that the public and the applicants know that their matter will be discussed in open, we have the Open Meetings Act. One other last comment on this slide. All public officials must take a training session via the internet, and that training course is now again available. It was not available for some time because the Attorney General's site got hacked, but it's up and running. And so if you haven't taken that open meetings course, please do that. I know David or I can help you with the login, sign-in portion for that. So with that, I just have a final slide. Again, we have to be sensitive to the public, both pro and con to the regulations. And it doesn't take long to be part of the Plan Commission to find out, people that own land are sometimes surprised they have to receive approvals. And it's best to recognize that and to bring everybody along at the same speed to explain the processes. And again, Chairman Sula does a good job of doing that, but sometimes, every individual commissioner has that opportunity to reinforce that. So unless there's any questions, and again, I'll stick around after tonight's meeting to address any specific questions you might have on our new economic interest statement form.
I have just a couple questions. That open meetings training, if we did it 5-6 years ago.
You just have to do it once.
Just have to do it once,
Right.
okay. And I listened very carefully to what you said about not making decisions early, if you will.
Right.
This evening, as we always do, we do one round of questioning before opening the floor to the public, and then a final round after that. Every one of us expressed an opinion.
That's fine.
That's okay,
Because
okay.
we've already closed, I believe you closed the floor at that point.
No,
Okay, well, we knew that there wasn't, and we knew that the hearing was over at that point.
Okay.
So technically, you would close the floor and then open it up for discussion.
So the first time that we're going should just be Q and A, not expressing support.
But you can always express concerns to say,
Okay.
hey, I'm struggling with this with your proposal.
Okay.
How do you square this with this requirement of the code? So you can ask those questions, but again, if you're, what I think is the best practice is not to give an indication that you're done. You've made your decision.
Right.
You know, there's nothing you could say, sir, to convince me this would be good for our community.
Okay.
Well, maybe that particular person isn't the last person that's going to address the particular issues, and lo and behold, the last speaker addresses the issues you had satisfactory, and now, you know, you're in the unenviable position of saying something that you're now going to backtrack on. So, you know, just don't do it. Keep an open mind until the very end.
Okay, good. I mean, from past experience, this team is incredible. You know, we're all human. We all kind of have an inkling as to which way we're going to lean, you know, when we walk into the chambers, but through the Q and A process, my gosh, there's been several times that, I've done a complete
Let
180.
me rephrase that. Usually before the meeting, you have framed questions that you want to have
Okay,
answered.
fine.
You have developed concern, or you've been able to
I see.
articulate the concerns that you want to raise at the hearing.
Okay.
That is the best way to say that.
Okay, fine. Okay. I'll shut up. But my point was, we do a really good job of exchanging ideas, okay?
You know, for the last 16 years, I can verify that.
Okay.
And there's been many difficult issues, and sometimes, quite frankly, contentious issues.
Right.
You know, where there might be some aspect of a development that is unpopular, and it's normally unpopular with the neighbors, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's just historically something that one could observe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Winter. We're on the calendar for April 20th. Is there going to be anything, Dave?
I forgot to check before I came to meet, so
Okay.
just watch your email, and if we have agenda items, we will, you know, broadcast those.
Great, okay. Open the floor to the public as a formality, close the floor to the public as a formality. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.